Hi, today we're going to be looking at this fume extraction system. It's the latest addition to the Metcal range and was recently released at the end of 2023. This one is the BVX-250 and this modernises the pre-existing range of Metcal fume extraction systems. It has a slightly better and more user-serviceable filter layout. It also connects to the latest solder stations from Metcal so that you can automatically control the airflow when the handpiece goes into standby. Now, if you do anything more than occasional soldering, you might want to think about adding some form of fume extraction to your bench. It is a common misconception, especially with lead solder. People often think that the smoke coming off contains loads of lead and it's going to poison you, but actually the majority of that smoke coming off is flux that's being burnt off when you're doing your soldering. And in fact, when you use lead-free solder, often those fluxes are quite a lot more harmful. And so if you moved over to lead-free soldering, you definitely want to add fume extraction in those circumstances. Now that can be a fairly simple setup. It could be opening the window and making sure you've got adequate airflow in the room. It could be a benchtop mounted fume extractor, which is usually just a fan and a charcoal filter. Or if you're doing more professional work, you might want to think about getting something more professional like one of these Metcal systems. Now this one is quite expensive, especially if you were a hobbyist. It is aimed at professional use, so this one's coming in at about £730 from several of the retailers that I took a look at. Now you might think that's extremely expensive for a fan and some filters, but it is quite competitively priced compared to some of the other devices on the market with similar specifications. So this one has a fan in it that is capable of up to 297 meters cubed per hour, but once you start adding the filters and the restriction of the tubing, that can drop down to about 75 meters cubed per hour, but it's very specific on the setup as to how much airflow you actually get. This one has 3 speeds and it's also universal input voltage, so you can use it across the world, so it must have a switch mode power supply in it. If we look at some of the competitors, we've got a unit from Pace, the ARM EVAC 105. That one's coming in at £900 and has an airflow up to 220 meters cubed. Again, lower once you add the hoses. There's a Weller Smog Kit 1, which comes in at £800. That one has an airflow of up to 150 meters cubed, and a BOFA system, which is the most expensive out of those, coming in at £1,000, the V250, 180 meters cubed per hour. And the other thing about those 3 systems is they're all single speed, so that means you turn it on and it just runs at full speed, which actually can be quite obnoxious in the lab. So what they've tried to do with this system is add some connectivity, and we'll test it out shortly in the video, but once you put the handpiece into the cradle, it will then either reduce the speed or it will shut it down. I'm not sure which, we'll find out soon. But this one has 3 speeds, so there's a little selector switch on here. I'm surprised they've gone for the 3-speed approach. I'm not sure why it's not continuously variable with a potentiometer, but that should do the majority of things that you want it to do. You can use it with either 1 or 2 inlets, so by default with the single system you get a piece of hose and then one of the inputs is blocked, but you can remove that and stick a second hose in there, and then that will allow you to use it in a system where maybe 2 people are sharing the workbench, or if you just want that extra extraction from 2 angles. It also comes with a few accessories, so we've got these nozzles, a round one and a rectangle one depending on your preference, and that is what sits near to wherever you're soldering. We get also a few accessories here, so there's also a clip to hold the hose in place if you want it permanently mounted on your bench, and we've also got this on-off button which is required, so you plug this in and this turns the system on and off. So the system is quite compact. Unlike the majority of Metcal stuff, this one is actually made from plastic, but it feels really nice quality. On the back here we have the air exhaust, and this can be rotated so that you can blow the extracted air in the direction that you want to, either to avoid drafts or if you want to direct it towards outside or something like that. At the bottom here we've got a fuse, we've got the mains IEC connector, we've got these two USB ports, and these are what connect to the solder station. So this works with the GT and the CV systems to control the speed when the handpiece is soldering or when it's in the cradle. And then we've got a little 3.5mm jack which connects to that power switch. On the top here, we've got the inlets from the hose. At the moment one's blocked off because I've just got the one inlet system, but you can remove this and buy an additional hose and plug it into the top here as I explained before. And then there is also a power switch just here as well to turn the system on and off. Then around the front of the device is the filters, and what there is here is a pre-filter which has a fairly coarse filter here, and then we have the HEPA filter in here, and there's an illuminated ring which changes colour depending on the status of the filters, and the filter change is very straightforward. On some of the other devices I've used, you have to unclip the top and remove it, and then start playing about with the filters inside the main canister. This one, you just rotate until the two dots line up, and then you can remove it, and there is the filter. And these are fairly reasonably priced. I'm not sure how long they last, but I would imagine, given that it's a two-stage filtration system, this one's probably going to need changing more often than this one. But certainly it gives you an indication when it's getting low, so when you might want to think about ordering a new one, and then an indication of when it's fully blocked. So looking at the construction of the filter, this is a fine filter. And then on the inside, you can see we've got a charcoal layer as well to remove any odours. So that should make a very pleasant workspace. And to remove the filter from the holder, there's a little lever here that you push up, and then you can twist the filter and it detaches like that. So you buy a new filter when you're ready, and then you can just click it onto here, rotate it, and push the lever here. So very nice and quick for filter changes. So when you take out the filters, you can see some of the aspects inside the unit. So there's a switch just at the top here, which detects when the pre-filter is installed properly. You can also see a few wires going to the LED ring. And then at the back of the unit is the fan inlet, which draws the air through the filter. There is another switch which detects when the HEPA filter is properly installed, so you can't accidentally use this incorrectly. It will always make sure the filters are properly installed before it allows you to use it. So with the unit unscrewed, this is what it looks like inside. Now I mentioned before that the system was made from plastic, but in fact there's this massive section just here. All of this is die-cast metal holding all of the main parts together really sturdily. So it's actually much more robust than I initially thought. And you can see there's metal plates and everything everywhere. So there's no chance of this thing falling to pieces or getting damaged easily. It's just the outer case where the filters are, where we've got the plastic. If we take a look at the system, at the back here you might just be able to see we've got a filtered IEC inlet along with a fuse, and then the mains comes up and goes to the power switch here, and then goes off to this Meanwell 200 watt 24 volt power supply. So a nice power supply there that then provides power to the Metcal mainboard. We've got a brushless DC motor here, which is the blower motor, and you can see the blower assembly in here. This looks to be a fully custom assembly that draws air through the inlet and then out through here, through this mesh grid and out through the back. The motor has the motor controller just here, and it appears to be of the same diameter. It's a circular PCB, so I think this is an off-the-shelf motor controller designed specifically for this motor. And then the control wires and the 24 volts come from the Metcal PCB just here. So we've got the USB connectors at the back going through this wiring harness here. There's a few protection components just here and a few other bits. And then there's a little FTDI chip, so presumably this is doing a USB to UART conversion. And then just above that is a tiny little PIC 32. So same as all of the other Metcal modern items, they're using the PIC 32 there. We've got a few voltage regulators as well, but there's not that much in the way of electronics on here, because essentially what it's doing is just receiving the inputs from the USB to tell it what speed to be at, or taking input from the speed selector switch, and it's driving the motor driver here with digital signals. All the motor drivers got all of the electronics for driving the brushless DC motor. We've got a few wires coming off, so we've got the RGB lights just here. We've got the wires going off to the speed selector, and we've got a couple of switches here. But as you can see, the general assembly is all quite nice. All the metal parts are properly earthed, as you would expect. So everything looks pretty good inside the system. So I think what we'll do now is give the unit a test. So first of all, we'll power it up without the filters installed and just see what happens. So we turn it on and it boots up. And then we get the flashing red light like this. And if we try and turn it on, just nothing happens. So we'll put the filters in. That's the first one. And then we line up the two white dots, push it in and rotate. Now we've still got the red ring, and if we turn it on now, we just get flashing red light. So perhaps it needs a power cycle. So the turquoise light means we're in standby and ready to go. So let's turn it on. We're at the lowest speed, and as you can hear, it's started up. Then we've got the speed selector switch. So this is the slowest speed. This is medium. And this is the highest speed. And it does sound pretty noisy. Normally this would be sitting underneath your bench or something like that, so slightly out of the way. And then that noise would be attenuated a bit by your workbench, and probably what you'll hear mostly is the noise of the airflow through the hose. But when we've got it on medium speed, this is supposed to be about 50 dBA, which is quieter than those other devices that we looked at a similar price range. But as I said, it does sound fairly loud. Let's see how it changes when we add the hose. So we've got the hose that we'll plug into here, and that just changed the sound slightly. It's not any quieter or more noisy, it's just got a little bit more wind noise, I think, through here, and it's changed the pitch of the blower. So there's a fair amount of airflow just there. Let's see how it works for doing some fume extraction, and then we'll have a look at how it integrates with one of the soldering stations. Right, so I've got the system hooked up to the CV system. Now for some reason I can't seem to get it to trigger when it goes into sleep mode. We have got the latest firmware on here, but I'll have to check with Metcal about that. I do also have the latest firmware for the GT, so we'll see how it behaves with that system as well. But for now, we've got it on the lowest speed. Let's see what the extraction is like. So we'll just melt some solder here on this PCB. This is 15 centimeters away. And I think that's showing up. Everything is getting extracted by the extractor. If I increase the distance, probably at about 20 centimeters here, it's still all going in. And then we'll melt a bit more solder. At kind of 25 centimeters, we're losing it, but I bring it in a little bit, and that is all getting sucked in. Let's try it on the highest speed. So no problems there. And we're off camera there, about 30 centimeters, and it's still all getting sucked in. So really quite a lot of suction there. As a means of comparison, I do actually have another extraction system. We've got the Quick 6101 here, and I actually bought some lockline tubing because the one that came with it was quite poor quality. So I've got some lockline tubing with the nice nozzle at the end here, and this is what I've been using primarily in the lab for the last couple of years. No problems whatsoever. It's rated for lower flow rate, so about 120 meters cubed an hour, so less than half of what the fan of the Metcal is rated for. And then they specify about 100 meters cubed an hour once you've got the filters there, and it probably drops a little bit more once you've got the nozzles. It does have a nice variable speed control, but no automatic control, so this is quite nice. You can just adjust the speed in various steps, and it will ramp the fan up. And let's see how that behaves. So again, about 150 millimeters here. No problems extracting all of that smoke. Change it to about 20 centimeters, and again we're capturing pretty much everything. We're just starting to lose a few bits, and then at about 25 centimeters we're capturing probably about half of the smoke. Next we'll try it with the GT120, and we just need to plug the USB lead into the back of the unit. So now we've got the GT system, and this one relies on movement of the handpiece, so it doesn't immediately detect that it's in the cradle. It does it after some period of time when it detects no movement. But as you can hear, the extractor is turned off. If I take the handpiece out the cradle, the extractor starts up, we do some soldering, and then I think I've set the timeout to around 10 seconds or so. So after 10 seconds of no movement, it should shut the extractor off. And there we go, the extractor is turned off now. Now, one thing I'd also like to check is just the airflow and the noise from the Quick and the Metcal system here on the right. Now, there is a slight difference. The tubing that I'm using here, the lockline tubing, is slightly larger in diameter than the one that's supplied with the Metcal, and I think we do get a little bit of noise from the tubing here, and unfortunately the way that I've got this set up on the bench at the moment, the tubing does sit very close to one of the microphones up here, so you may be picking up a bit of extra noise. But let's turn on the Metcal first, have a look at the noise and see if we can measure the airflow. Then we'll do the same thing at the faster speed, and then we'll repeat for the Quick. And so what we saw there is that even on its lowest setting, this actually has significantly higher airspeed through the nozzle than the Quick does on its very highest setting. So it's a very high performing machine, and when you set this to maximum, I was close to the maximum speed that I could read with that anemometer. Extremely high airflow through the system, but the consequence of that is that it is actually quite noisy when you're in a quiet lab. It's probably fine for an industrial environment, and obviously we looked at the specs earlier. When you compare it to its direct competitors, this one does actually have better specifications and it is quieter. But one of the biggest complaints from people that I work with and other engineers is that these extractors are often just really noisy, and when you're in a slightly quieter lab, the temptation is just to not use it as opposed to dealing with the noise, which I don't think is that healthy. The Quick is quite nice because it does go down to an extremely low airflow, and if you position the nozzle right, you don't actually need that huge amount of airflow. If you position it slightly over what you're working on, the smoke naturally rises and then into the nozzle. So what I would like to see, and I'm not sure if it's possible, but there is a PIC 32 in there. We've got the USB port, so I'm hoping that this is firmware upgradable. It would be really nice to see a larger spread between the lowest setting and the highest setting, so you can turn this down quite a bit more and consequently get this system significantly quieter when you don't need that extra performance. If you need the performance, that's absolutely fine. You're going to have to deal with the airflow. The tubing does make quite a bit of noise, so I am going to see if I can modify or 3D print something so that I can use that lockline tubing with this. And the tubing that I've got is actually a little bit longer, so it'd be a little bit more helpful in the lab. But other than that, I think everything else is really quite nice. It's a very nicely built unit. Obviously, it is a premium unit, so we've got the pricing associated with that. I think the only other thing that I personally would have changed, but nothing can be done about it now, is I probably would have put the speed control on this remote control thing so that you can control it from your bench rather than having to reach underneath and change the settings. This could have been a potentiometer even, so that we had adjustable speed. But everything else, pretty nice. The filters are quite easy to work with, on a par with the pricing of filters for everything else. Even the filters for the Quick are really quite expensive. There is a different version of the filter available which has additional filtration capabilities. That one's slightly more expensive, but this is really nice. You can just change out that filter really quickly should you need to, and when this one does ultimately need replacing, it's a simple pull out and change. So really nice human factors and industrial design with the unit. So if I end up with a firmware update file for the CV system, then I'll do a follow-up, and that system should be a lot more responsive in terms of turning it on and off. We don't have to wait for the accelerometer on the CV system. And if there are any updates for this unit as well, I'll do a follow-up then. Otherwise, this unit's just going to sit under my bench and hopefully happily just work away all the time that I'm soldering, keeping the air nice and clean. So if you've got any thoughts or comments about this unit, don't forget to leave them in the comments section down below. I'll put a link in the description as well. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thanks for watching.